You're listening to the Gutsy Podcast, where we talk about all things real, raw, and ridiculous about running a business authentically. I'm Laura Wallace, also known as the Laura Aura, lover of all things inspirational, owner of Works Graphic Design, and your host on this journey through entrepreneurship. I'm here to help you get out of your head and back into action as a passionate business rock star. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday as we fuel your gutsy. Sex. Yeah, I'm going to come right out in this episode and say the word sex. It's such a hush-hush word, yet behind closed doors, it's a huge part of who we are. There is power in the connection and there is power in the release. So many of you are ashamed of your sexual desires or think that you're crazy or too much. Girl, as a fellow freak in the sheets, we're going to rip off that entire Band-Aid and normalize the topic of sex and how that relates to your business. Today, we are talking about the power of sexual energy and how that can actually fuel your business. And to do that, I brought in an amazing expert in sexual healing. Over the last decade, Jamie Elizabeth Thompson has developed a body of work to support women, men, and couples with letting go of negative patterns around sex so they can have a fulfilling intimate life. Jamie is the founder of Awakening Your Erotic Muse, a community for women to reconnect with their feminine sensuality and turn on their orgasmic potential. Jamie has traveled the world teaching, facilitating masterminds, hosting retreats, and working with private clients on how to up-level their success and creativity through the mastery of sexual arts. Jamie, welcome to the Gutsy Podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I love this, that we are speaking to the freak in the sheets within all of us here.
Oh, girl, yes. This is a fair game conversation. You know, I have been manifesting having this conversation for months. So I could not tell you how excited I am to really just dig into this.
Me too. It's my favorite topic.
So I'm curious, how did this become your life? Tell me the backstory of your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, it's a great question. So my life began in a very conservative, traditional Christian home. And I was aware of the box that I felt everyone around me was living in the small town that I grew up in, and very quickly decided that I was going to break out of that box. And I think a lot of us who are entrepreneurs have that kind of drive where it's just like, I don't even know where it comes from. There's just something in me that was like, this is not the life I want. And I looked around and no one was living the life I wanted. So I moved to California and began studying the sexual arts and getting into coaching and studying neuroscience and quantum physics and tantra. And through that process began working with people in the same field, and became really fascinated by how I was working with people in dating and relationships and working with them on communication and relating styles and how to open yourself to love. And the one thing that I found that was a sticking point, the obstacle that was getting in the way for so many of the women and couples that I was working with, was sexuality. And, a repression of one's sexuality, or not really owning their desire, not really being able to communicate that about their desire, or having shame about their desire. And all of this is completely normal and actually bred and conditioned into us from many different angles through our culture, through media and sex education and Hollywood and religion. And there's just a lot of programming that doesn't work about sexuality. And so I was finding that this was the thing that was getting in the way. I mean, 1 in 3 divorces is because of sex. So it's ending relationships and it's having things not work. And so I really honed in on that and was able to also turn a relationship around that I was having that was very sexually unfulfilling, through really finding the power and unleashing the power of this energy in my own body and using my body as a source of energy and power and pleasure, and was able to help shift my partner into being able to do the same thing. And so it completely turned our sex life around. And so it just is something that I have been fascinated by and working with for the last decade, and specifically now have shifted to working with high powered women, because what's so fun about working with high powered women is they are like, yes, I will use my orgasm to fuel my business. Yes, I will look at how the bedroom can be the greatest personal development tool that I haven't learned how to use yet. And they understand that there is power in going outside of the box, because that's what's driving us in business, right? That's why we are doing something different and doing something that inspires us. And so I'm really excited to be here and dive into this with you here today.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I love your like scientific side of this as well, because
Yes.
it much like anything that is, quote unquote out of the box or unnormal or untraditional, things like meditation or grounding or using crystals for healing, and there's a lot of what a lot of people might consider woo-woo things. I am about as woo-woo as you can get, so I believe wholeheartedly in just really tapping into yourself energetically. But I love the scientific side of this. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about the science behind sex and the power that it brings.
Absolutely. Well, what's interesting is there's in Taoist philosophy, I'm going to go the other way first. They talk about sexual energy as a concentrated version of your life force. So, a lot of us have heard the word chi, right? That's the Taoist word for our universal life force. They actually call sexual energy jing qi, because it's a more potent, concentrated version. So when we unlock that sexual energy, that jing qi, it actually brings more energy into our physical body. And there's research that talks about how orgasm, like having an orgasm a day or making sure that you are actually having orgasms, it balances your brain chemistry and lowers cortisol, which is the stress hormone, increases your serotonin production, which is the happy brain chemical, and is just generally good for clearing your body. So on the Eastern and the Western, there's different ways of talking about it. But if we're really just looking at sexual energy and orgasmic energy, and like your brain, if you hook your brain up to an EKG and you see what happens in your brain when you have an orgasm, the whole thing is lighting up. And so in that, it's actually a space where, in the space of orgasm, and especially if we can learn to prolong that space and really work with it as a tool, I think our orgasm is a personal development tool. So we can really work with it that way, then we can consciously use that energy to manifest. We can consciously use that energy to heal ourselves, and we can use that energy to bring in inspiration and open ourselves to an inspiration. In French, orgasm is la petite mort, which means the little death. So every time we have an orgasm, there's like this, our body hits a reset. And a lot of us have experienced that. And it's like, oh yeah, it can be good for stress relief. And there's some like really surface level and very valuable reasons to have orgasm. And then there's some much deeper reasons. And so maybe we can get into some of those here today as well.
Yeah, you have my undivided attention. I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that that happens in that space is it's in that space of the little death. I just love that, because it's in that space of full surrender, where we're really letting go, where something else can take hold, right? Like our higher self or universal intelligence or God or a higher power, however you see that, can have an opportunity to really take the wheel. So it's like Do you know how when you're, when you really want something and there might be that energy of force where it's like, we're like, oh, I really want this and I'm forcing my way through. And then all at once something happens and we're like, okay, I'm just going to let go and I'm going to forget about it. And then of course, at that moment, the thing happens. So in orgasm, that's what it's like. It's like creating an energy where it's like you have a vision, and you can, one of the practices that I invite women into in the Awakening Your Erotic Muse course, my online community, is actually focusing, visioning, like actually doing the work that many of us know how to do of, creating a vision, feeling it in our body. And then I actually say, bring that into your self-pleasure session and focus on that vision. And then in the moment of orgasm, and as you are building to that, to actually release it into the atmosphere, because at that moment you are piercing through to a higher frequency at the moment of orgasm. So that's my hippie way of saying what I said earlier about your brain lighting up in an EKG, right? It's like you are piercing through to a place where more of you is present. So if you're holding a vision at that time, then the possibilities and the inspirations and the new ideas are more likely to be able to trickle in that moment of surrender, because you're out of your head, right? In those moments of surrender, it's like when you're actually having an orgasm, you are not thinking about your to-do list. You're in a moment of surrender. And so that's when something new can come in. So that's one way to use your orgasm as a way to really fuel your business.
I love it. So I love the validation because I know that at that heightened sense, I am a higher vibration version of myself. I'm actually sometimes not even in myself. So
Mm-hmm.
what I love to do is what I consider like manifesting during orgasm, where I think about a goal or what I'm working towards, or something that I'm really just inviting to be in my life, and I will focus on that wholeheartedly and then release it. So I love that you said this, because it almost validates that this is a thing to do and that it's actually really powerful.
That's so great. I love hearing that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And that's one of the many reasons I wanted to bring this topic up, because one of the other things I think is fairly common is that the word sex and the concept of sex and talking about sex is such a taboo topic. So I'm curious how you have helped people to normalize it, or invite it to be part of their life and know that it's safe and beautiful and natural.
Yes, here's the thing that is so fascinating about taboo is when there is something that is considered taboo, because we are not supposed to do it. We all know that part of us that the child or the teenager that when you say, oh, don't run in the street, is going to run in the street. It's just going to try that. And so it's when something has such a taboo projection on it, like sex does in our culture, it ends up gaining a lot of power. So when we look towards that and lean into it and feel the discomfort that might bring to lean into something that is considered taboo, we are directly accessing that power, all that power that has been projected onto the taboo of sexuality and pleasure is just rich. It's fertile with energy that we can actually use and source in ourselves when we connect with that part. So I find that one thing that can be helpful for people to like kind of just wiggle this taboo a little bit. Like I look at it like it's like sometimes our sexuality can be like a tangled knot of Christmas lights, right? Where it's like it's like you look at it and it's confusing, or you don't know what you want, or there's shame, and there's judgment, and self-criticism and inadequacy and performance and all kinds of pieces that are mixed up in one of the most purely creative, healing, and powerful acts that human beings can engage in. I mean, we all got here because people had sex, right? So the fact that it's taboo is just very, very interesting to me. And I think that there are people in power who are gaining something from this being in the taboo, from being in what I would call distortion, where it's not a clear, clean energy that is just like, yes, this is for healing, pleasure, and power, and that's okay. There's something about, disempowering the people through having this energy be locked away in a box. And so if we can start to look at take a step back and look at the meta of why would this be taboo if this is something that everyone does? Like, why would this be put in a box? And to understand like where our programming actually came from and why we have the experience of it being taboo. Now, the ways that this programming gets delivered are generally through sex education and religion, which, even if we are not religious, the puritanical programming is seeped into our culture, and then through media. So through those three places, people get their programming, and if their programming comes from media, and they picked up something from media, then often it's telling you that you need to perform, and that your performance matters more than your pleasure. Or media programming is telling you that you're inadequate and you need to, take this medication or in order to have a higher sex drive, or you need to, wear these clothes or put on this makeup or look like this. There's a lot of media programming that's like, you're not sexy unless you are this particular model that we're going to airbrush and put in this magazine, right? And so women end up not feeling sexy, and not feeling desirable, and not loving themselves. And so that greatly impacts one's experience of their sexuality and their sex drive. So if we can move past the taboo, we can look at this and see, oh, wow, this is actually where some of this has come from. And then there's sex education. Now, often with sex education, the programming, when we can get past the taboo and look at it, is one of very mechanical. It's like, okay, so when you have sex, here's the banana, you put the condom on the banana, and you put the penis in the vagina. And it's kind of like, okay, that's not very inspiring. And I'm definitely not turned on. Right. So it's the sex education version of sex is like purely mechanical, and it's about the what, but it's not about the how. It's not about the curiosity and the pleasure and the innocence and the juice that surrounds sexuality. So, a lot of us who've had, just got the the basic sex education are experiencing like if you imagine that sexuality in its wholeness is like as a pie, they're experiencing like a 3% slice of the pie, right? Where it's not actually the potential in all directions of what sexuality can really bring. And then the third programming is the religious or the moral programming. So this programming can be really deep, and this is where it can be really taboo. I think that this programming has the most taboo around sexuality because there's a lot of shame and repression. Because if you're told, look, if you want to be desired by a man, like you better be smart, because if you're a slut, then no one's going to like you. So don't like sex too much. Be a good girl, right? So then that programming really limits the internal, freak in the sheets, as you mentioned earlier, right? It's like you don't get to be that part of yourself. You don't get to be the part of yourself that loves sexuality. And this is the one that I had the most of. This is the one that I was raised in, and so it's like there's a repression that's like, God doesn't want you to have sex outside of marriage, or pleasure this is just for procreation. Sex is something that you have to make more babies and carry on the human race, and enjoying it is really an afterthought. And so, and there can be a lot of shame in the collapse and the convoluted nature of thinking that pleasure is like the source of evil, which is actually an underlying belief system that exists in a lot of moral and religious programming around sex. So if we can really start to dismantle, like untangle these Christmas lights of what our sexual programming has been, then we can open ourselves up to creating a whole new realm, like a completely new paradigm, where this is actually not something that is taboo, but rather something that has been conditioned to be taboo. And so what I ask people at this point, after like looking at these different programmings and really feeling into what are the belief systems that I grew up with, and what was my family of origins experience of sexuality, and what did they teach me? What did I learn at school? What did I learn from media? What did I learn from my friends? Like really unpacking all of that, which is work that a lot of, us female entrepreneurs have done in the world of business and finances, right? So it's like just taking that work that we've done and moving it into this area and looking at what of these belief systems are my creation and what are by default, and how are those that are by default actually serving or not serving me living in my highest, most powerful, most resourced, most radiant, sensual, feminine self.
This is fantastic. And one of the things that I just jotted down, I see as like this woven piece, is that a lot of women, and especially entrepreneurial women, but a lot of women are only doing what they are taught is right or okay. Mm-hmm. Like you talked about it being taught in school, you talked about it being taught in religion. And so then when you have this kind of high level eccentric version of yourself, that's where a lot of shame comes in. Like, oh, like there's probably something wrong with me, or I'm weird, or I'm a freak, or like something is going on. So I should suppress that because somebody's going to think that I'm nuts.
Yeah.
So then you don't act on it. But then I know even personally, but just in general, like when you hold that in, I almost look at it as like sexual tension. Like when there is so much of that energy inside of you and it has no place to go, it can get really messy and crazy, and you don't know what to do with yourself. And I think it just leads to a lot of challenges in life when that stuff is bottled up.
Yes. I mean, it leads to, when that energy is not released, it has to go somewhere. So there's a way that it actually implodes. And this is where, a lot of women, start getting, start having health problems, even from this. I've seen, there was a woman in my course that was having like pain in her, in her yoni when she was having sex. And it was from this like bottling it up and this tension. And when she was able to actually release it, it was like the vitality came back, and then she, her gut issues started healing, and she started having more energy, and then she didn't need as much sleep because she was more resourced. And it was like the energy actually started flowing. Because if there's a kink in the hose, and like you said, and even just having a view of our sexuality that is like, oh, well, this part is not okay, is creating a kink in our own hose. And so we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot by not allowing all of us to be in our fullness, and all of us to be online and active. So there's a way that this really can work in healing as well.
It makes so much sense. You alluded to something earlier that I'd love to tap into as well. And you were talking about your relationship and how this was not always present and how you guys work together. So I know that a lot of the women listening may be thinking like, okay, well, I'm ready to go all in, but maybe my partner is not, or maybe maybe I'm single, or, the opportunity just isn't there. What kind of guidance do you give both people in a relationship, but also our single ladies, on how to really harness into this energy?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest entry points is just by having a really honest look internally before bringing it to a partner, before bringing it to someone we're dating, or it's to really look internally and see, am I in relationship with the range of desire? Do I feel like I'm turned on in life? Like, am I moving from my logic and my brain and my masculine and what I think I should do, or am I lit up and turned on and moving from the inspiration of my soul's guidance? And that's just a good place to look. And if you're not feeling lit up and turned on a regular daily basis, then checking in and seeing what parts of your sexual expression, your feminine, your sensuality, your desire, what parts of that are being cut off, suppressed, judged, criticized, shut down. Like, what parts of that are being um, swept underneath the rug? And this is an excellent journal exercise to really just write that down. And even if there's things that you're like, whoa, I can't believe that I just wrote that, but I actually, I actually want to be dominated. Oh my goodness, right? Like, write it down, like let it move. And so that we are not in an illusion to ourselves. Before we can have a healthy sexual connection with someone else, we have to be in congruence and alignment with our own desires. So in really writing those things down, I have a tool called the erotic menu, which is really supportive for looking at what your desires are, and how you can look deeper into them, like expand the possibility inside of your desire. Because there's some desire that's very energetically based, and there's some desire that is more sensually based, and there's some desire that is like a very primal energy, and there's some that it actually is in the taboo realm, where it's like you want things that are that a part of you feels is a little wrong, but it's actually something that you really want. So it's like really breaking down in these different elements of the erotic menu, and I'll include that here so you guys can have a look at that. But when you can break it down, then looking at like what your real desires are, and what it would feel like if you had them. Like, what would that do for you in your body? Like, what does the turn on feel like that you want to be having? And starting to let yourself have that experience. And this is where some women come up with, the blocks get in the way. And this is where some of the programming, or just the not ever having a conscious adult erotic education. And so the erotic menu can really support with that. And then the next step is really beginning your practice. So this is where, in the online community, Awakening Your Erotic Muse, and the curriculum associated with that, it is about developing a ritual of pleasure. It's about developing a ritual of bringing curiosity to your own body again, like bringing love um, and focused attention, and awakening one's sensuality and inner well of radiance again, and really looking at like where am I blocking my own pleasure? Where am I blocking my own turn on, which is a source of feminine power? And so in looking at that and developing a practice, then the energy starts moving. And this is a great time to then invite a partner into it. So what the mistake I see a lot of people make who have partners, or who are dating, or who are in long-term relationships where sex is an issue, is they immediately go to thinking that the other person is the problem, and wanting to have their partner change, or wanting to have the men that they're dating change. And this is something that I call outsourcing your turn on. And outsourcing your turn on is expecting that someone else is supposed to provide you your turn on. And I completely understand why people have this view, because this is what media teaches us. This is what we are taught, is that he is the source of pleasure. We are not the source of pleasure. So coming back to that place where a woman knows internally that she is the source of her own pleasure is a very empowered place for a woman to be standing in. And from there, as the turn on begins moving, inviting a partner into that through clear and honest communication about some of the things you're discovering about your desire. And it can be it can be a very inspiring conversation that is something like, I've began looking at how I can be more lit up and turned on in general in life and access my feminine radiance and my sensuality. And I'm really excited about it. And in that, I've discovered some parts of my desire that have been shut down due to, this programming that I received growing up, and the fact that I'm, a feminine woman who's wearing a masculine mask to succeed in business. And, I'm coming back into my feminine. And these are some things that I'm realizing I desire. Are you open to exploring some of this with me? And that can be the conversation you have with your partner, which is much more inspiring than like, our sex life sucks and it's your fault. Right. So, that's how I see the continuum going that ends up being really supportive. And then as a couple, you can create something that I call an erotic ritual. And you can have personal erotic rituals, you can have erotic rituals together, but it's where you're entering the space of sexuality as like you're going into a sacred space. You take your shoes off, you light the candles, you make sure the room is pristine and clean, and it's like the space that you enter and you come into connection, and you're soul to soul, heart to heart, eye to eye, like really entering this space with an intentionality of like, what are we creating here? Because this is the energy that creates life. It is the energy that brought us all here. And it's the energy that creates anything. Sexual energy is creative energy. So if we can shift the way that we are looking at it and enter it as a dojo and as a ritualistic sacred space, then there's a lot that can be created both individually and as a couple.
Amazing. I really, really love the way that you approach the conversation. Like, are you open to exploring this with me? Like, you hit the nail on the head when you go right at it with this, like, I'm ready to go into Fight Club mode. Everybody kind of shuts down, right? But I really love this, like, we are talking to very powerful, high energetic, want more out of life female entrepreneurs. And I think sometimes when you go into that space, we feel like, oh, now I'm being that intensive female again, or people are going to look at me at a certain way, or I'm stating my authority, so it's almost I don't want to say offensive, but like, you're too much, right? But really, by going inward, I feel like we're exploring the different version, and not that we really need reason, but I feel like it almost gives us reason and depth and purpose to why are we in need of these things in the first place.
Yes. There's something that you just said that really I want to touch on a little bit because of who your audience is. And, I imagine many of your listeners have the experience of being like, where is my feminine energy? Because I've just seen this overlap between women who are really successful in life, or women who are, pursuing a career and really in business and creating impact in the world, where often the masculine side can be highly developed. And that's how we become successful. I know. I mean, one of the reasons that had me turn to really resourcing myself with the sexual arts and coming back into a more feminine magnetic place was I hit a burnout. Like I was so in my masculine and I was really effective and I was achieving, and I burned out and I became overwhelmed and like had to lay down for 2 weeks straight. I mean, it was like that happened. And so there's this way that if we are, truly more feminine in nature, like have a stronger feminine polarity than masculine polarity, but yet we are using our masculine polarity to create in life, that there's even more of a need to be able to come back to this place that we're speaking of today, of the feminine magnetism, and the place where we're resourced by our own energy. And so there's a way that often I see women who are really successful have a harder time with being in their feminine, and really turning off that masculine layer when they come home, like actually being able to reset themselves to be in their feminine, to then help polarize their partner into their masculine. And so there can be this kind of battle. And that's where, the Fight Club question comes from, right? They come home and they're like, wait, we're not having a good sex life. And it's like, okay, wait, how are we approaching, how can we approach this from the place that you mentioned of like that inner, just delicious, resourced, pleasure-filled place? And when we come to our partner from that place, we're empowering them to be in their masculine the way that we want them to. And we're empowering ourselves to be in our own resourced energy. And so there's a way that I find that a lot of women in business have a hard time turning the business off. And so that's where creating a ritual where we like step out of Fight Club and into like sacred erotic temple space, right? Like how do we step out of that mindset and into out of the logic mindset and into the magic mindset? And so that often can come from really just creating a practice with ourself or our partner that is a reset. And I mean, resets can be as simple as, as lighting some candles and making a glass of hot tea, and maybe just tuning into some sensuality in our body by some physical touch, like just actually touching our our arms or our neck or our chest or our legs, just in a way that feels sensual, or running a bath with essential oils, and it just actually letting ourselves stop the thinking and come into a place of enjoying our feminine body again. And so there's a lot of different ways to reset, and that's it, and practices that can be really supportive with that. And that is another part of the tools that are in the Awakening Your Erotic Muse community to help us reset, so that we can spend part of our day being in our magic and not just in our logic. And then the advanced course of this is, how can we be in our magic even while we are creating in our business? And so, we can have these little, I call them sensual state changes, where we, it's like before you get on, like, for example, right now, it's like before I get on the podcast call, I light a candle, and, I stop and I come into a place of being in my own sensuality. And it's like a reset, right? Or as we're emailing, or as we're on the phone, it's like being in a place where we're in our body moving, and in our physical and emotional experience, and not just like this disassociated head that's like we're just only living in our head and only thinking. We like forgot that we have this amazing body. And so finding a way to be turned on and resourced throughout the day is really the advanced course of what we're talking about here.
I never even put two and two together, and what you were saying was like literally giving me chills. Like, I know that sometimes my husband will be like, I can tell that you're still in work mode. Mm-hmm. And I never put two and two together, that is more my masculine side coming out and not being in tune with my feminine side. And sometimes it can be really challenging to make that switch. So that's where it seems like having that ritual, or that very intentional switch, where like, okay, I've been a boss all day, and I've been directing and calling and, guiding and doing all these things as a boss. But when I come home, I don't need to be a boss anymore. I get to be an amazing, like, powerful wife and mother, and just be present in myself. So that just kind of blows my mind. I never put two and two together that my quote unquote work mode is really me still being in my masculine energy. Fascinating.
Wow, what a great realization.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we talk about here and what we're implementing, and just, all across the board, is just awareness, right? Like
Yes.
when you have an awareness around something, like all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't recognize that before. It's like when you buy a red car, you never see red cars, but all of a sudden when you buy a red car, all of a sudden everybody and their brother has a red car. So it's just that in tune awareness of that particular level of energy that you are in.
Yes. And, one little, just a little practice I'll give you just right here, right now, because so many women have exactly what you just said, where their partner's like, I can tell you're still in work mode, like that is such a common thing. And, there's something in science called mirror neurons. Have you heard of this?
I have not.
So mirror neurons is a part of our neurology and body chemistry that syncs up with another person. And so we can actually drop into a state of resonance where our parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our rest and relaxed state, begins to be stimulated, so that we actually relax out of our sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response. And so often when we are still in work mode and it's like it's time to slow down and get out of it, but we haven't yet, there's an opportunity to come into connection with your partner, and allow the mirror neurons to begin firing, so that your parasympathetic nervous system begins to slow down and relax. And so how you can do this is by simply, physical touch can be really supportive. If, you just put one hand on his heart and he puts his hand on your heart, and you actually begin breathing deeply together while looking in each other's eyes for 2 minutes. And that's kind of a magic time frame. And in the 2-minute period, your nervous systems will actually begin to sync up, just like when a baby lays on its mother's chest, their heartbeats sync up and their nervous system sync up, and it like relaxes. So you can do that with each other as a means of dropping into a more still resonant state. And something as simple and quick as that can be a state change. And then to bring in intimacy and connection, after this, you can share, something I'm noticing in this moment right now is, or, how I'm feeling now in connection with you is, and have a couple of sentence stems or something like those to bring in a little bit of intimacy. And something as simple as that can literally be the state change that is needed to reset yourself into your feminine and into a more enjoyable, place of being with your partner.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Like, it's almost calming just thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's just really just pausing, because these are busy, hustling women, which I'm going to talk about the word hustle in a second. But just taking the intentional time to just slow down and recognize your partner, and know that they're not there to like fight and combat you. Like they legitimately want to help. And a lot of times they just don't know how. Yeah. But we have to be able to release and surrender to be able to allow them to enter our space as well.
That's right. That's right.
So,
Often they're just waiting for, the invitation, but there's no invitation in work mode, right? There's no invitation in, in being in your, masculine logical self. There's not actually the space for the invitation. And often I see men are like, they're waiting for it. And then, eventually they can become shut down because they haven't received the invitation in so long that, then there's another issue to work with them as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
You talked a little bit about the word hustle, and that word is getting, a lot of praise, but also being really challenged right now. And you talked about magnetization over hustle.
Mm.
And so I'm super curious about that concept.
Yes, this is one of my favorites.
Oh,
So,
yay.
um, yeah, so I call it the masculine hustle or the feminine magnetism. And because hustling in itself is a masculine way of creating results, and it works. So I'm not going to knock hustle at all, because, many people are extremely successful hustling. And a lot of them also have, burnout and adrenal issues later in life, because there is an impact of that go 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 energy when there isn't enough relaxation. It's like there isn't enough of a like a real exhale and resting. And some people can really run that for a very long time. Um, Now there's a whole nother way of being in business, and that is moving from magnetism. And this is the feminine magic. And so how I would explain this is, that unstoppable feeling of pure body bliss when you first fall in love. Like, just think about that feeling, feel that feeling. And how when you're in that space, how people are like, wow, you're looking extra radiant. Like, what have you been doing? Did you cut your hair? Did you get a facial? They're trying to figure out why you are so stunning right now. And when you're in that place of first falling in love, and people are impacted by it, this is what it feels like to be in your feminine magnetism. This is what
Mm.
it feels like to activate that secret weapon in business. And so the thing with any way that we feel is that it might seem like it's context and circumstance dependent, but it's actually not. It's actually something that can be internally sourced and turned on just as long as you know how. So that just fell in love feeling is possible to be internally resourced. Earlier, we talked about externally resourcing it, and therefore feeling like we need someone or our environment in order to create that, to being an internal resource. And so when we can tune into our magnetism, we actually don't need to overcompensate with hustle. And so I see this happen where it's like when women really drop into their power and they're just in their radiance, they actually work less but create more, because it's like a magnet. It stuff begins coming in because people are just like, who are you and what are you doing and how can I get some of it? So as an entrepreneur and someone who's having an impact and is their business, when you are your brand or you are the force behind your brand, you don't have to force in order to draw in what you're wanting more of. And so when we can be in our feminine pleasure, and pleasure is a big part of magnetism. It's like when you're really in your pleasure and in your turn on, people just want to know what's going on with you. And they're like, I'll have what she's having, right? And so it's just really looking at this belief system of like that women need to hustle in order to be successful. And I've just really seen that does not need to be true, and that we can enjoy the journey if we can learn to really activate this effervescent radiance that is within.
So I'd really love to pick your brain on this, because I think that this is going to like rapidly penetrate a lot of minds right now, because I think that subconsciously we're trained, right? Or, our environment trains us like that that's what we have to do. You have to go into this masculine. If you're not hustling, if you're not working 20 hours a day, if you're not doing all these things, then you're not winning. And so it's very easy to create that pattern. So I'm curious, what would you advise on how to start kind of undoing that, and how can we tap into our feminine energy so that we can really start thriving? Because there's so many women that are just on the brink of thriving, but it's like an uphill battle every single direction.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is learning how to surrender and trust. Like there's something about the posture of surrender. Now, when I say surrender, I am still Surrender is an active and inspired posture, but it's not a forward posture. It's not a, leaning forward and forcing. It's rather, it comes from a space of listening. And so, it's the responsive. It's a responsive place where you're listening to your internal guidance. You're listening to your life, and you're listening to your connection with source. And then there's a surrender to that listening. So it's learning how to distinguish what voice is coming from like my logical mind in my head, and what voice is coming from the pulse of life, what voice is coming from my innate wisdom and intelligence that lives in my body. And one way that I find that is really supportive to tune back into that is to actually open a dialogue with our heart, our womb, and our vagina. So actually tuning into pussy wisdom.
Oh, I love this.
Right? And womb wisdom. And each of these energy centers will have a different voice. And you know that something is right when those three voices are all in alignment, and they can speak as one voice. So it can be interesting to actually ask yourself a question when there's like a moment of like, a business decision, or just something that's important in life, and tune in with energy centers, and put your hands on your heart, and and ask yourself the question, and then open yourself in that surrendered, active, inspired place to listen, and just be, just open yourself to listen, and then put your hands on your womb, and there's a completely different type of voice that comes from that. And then putting your hands on your pussy, there's a completely different type of voice that comes from that. And so I call it the pussy oracle. And there can actually just listen to this part of ourselves, so that we're not only making decisions from logic, we're not only moving forward from logic, but we're actually bringing some of these questions into even our self-pleasure practice. We talked about that at the beginning of this session is bring a question that you don't know the answer to, and then go pleasure yourself, and open yourself to receiving the answer. And something as simple as that can even be like, wow, I just used my feminine pleasure and energy to give myself a creative and inspired answer to something that I might have just tried to use a formula for, or tried to use my logic to uncover the answer to. And innovative answers do not come from logic. Innovative answers come from the moment where we let logic go and open to something greater. So the more we can be doing that, the more we're moving from that, that hustle place to the magic place.
This whole feminine magic place is just so enlightening, because I think that this may be the permission that a lot of women don't need, but it may be a validation to help shift them over something, because I think sometimes we discredit our feminine energy, or it's not what's widely accepted, or this is not how it works, and we just have all these preconceived notions. But when we're talking about all these different methods, you can really see the power. I mean, we are powerful creatures. Like just the fact that we have pussy oracles. I mean, like what? I don't know. I just find it really, really encouraging that this is a place of power, and honestly, a place of peace. Sometimes when you're really operating in that masculine energy for so long, like you said, I mean, people end up with adrenal failure and, just complete like chronic stress and anxiety and depression and all this stuff. And I'm realizing literally right now in this call that is because we are operating from a space that doesn't belong to us.
Mm. That's right. And it's interesting because in transitioning from, you mentioned like a place of peace, and it's like there's this place of relaxation, and where we're just in ourselves, and we know what that's like. We know what flow states feel like. We know when we're on. We know when we're like when we're just like absolutely slaying, right?
Oh yeah.
And when we're in that place, it's like there's a flow that's happening. It's not a force, right? And the flow is powerful. So it is a force to be reckoned with, but it's not forcing. And there's it's like inside of this place, that's not when we're checking out and like, eating Ben and Jerry's and watching TV at the end of a day, right? It's like I think that the way to actually resource ourselves and find that place of peace is, people say, oh, I'm relaxing in front of the TV, and I'm like, but I actually feel like instead of checking out, the practice is about plugging into ourselves and plugging into our source and doing things in our off time that is recharging, not just like a neutral. Like sometimes like watching TV can be this like
Oh yeah.
emotional checkout, but it's like, what about things that are actually recharging and resourcing? Like being in a bath and like tuning into your heart and your pussy oracle for 10 minutes is going to be more recharging than watching 2 hours of TV. And you also will save time, right? So it's like using some of these different tools that might seem a little strange at first, but to really bring us back to our body and back to our center, can be a great way to make the shift and find that place of internal peace that you're speaking of.
Yeah, that autopilot where we think that we're recharging, but I mean, again, you just called it straight for what it is. It's just habit. We go into like this mind numbing space where we think that we feel better, but we're just in this cycle of repeating old habits that kind of keep us in the same place.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, I know that I could probably talk to you for another like 6.5 hours, but I'm curious as we kind of start to round the bend here. Any other advice that you have around, just really harnessing sexual energy as it relates to just being a badass boss and entrepreneur and ladypreneur, or however you want to classify it? Any other advice that you'd love to give to our listeners?
Yes. I feel like we talked so much about, business and entrepreneurs, and there's just a way that what I want to say is there's a way that when we're out there, we're creating and we're doing something and we have a mission, and thank goodness there are people out there that have purposes and missions, and like they are the ones who are driving life and like changing the course of life and humanity. And the reminder that I just want to give is um, about enjoying the journey, and remembering that there is time, because what matters is how we are experiencing ourselves on the journey. So it's like, why not feel sexy and in our power and in our pleasure on the journey of success, instead of just being so obsessed with success that we completely put our sexuality and the enjoyment of our own life on the back burner.
Amazing. I mean, we can really truly live and thrive and succeed all in the same space. I think sometimes we just need the reminder that that's real. Like that can actually happen, but it really starts from within.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, it does.
Jamie, I'm curious what gutsy means to you.
Mm. Mm. Gutsy means following my truth. Gutsy means not caring whether other people like or agree with what my soul says I need to do in this life.
It's amazing. You really don't. And ladies listening, you are the driver of your own navigational path. You get to decide which road you go down, and quite frankly, you don't need anyone's permission to do that. Jamie, I also know that everyone is insanely hungry to know, how can they get in touch with you? How can they look at your programs? We talked about the menu. How do we stay in touch with you?
Yeah. So the two pieces that I mentioned on the call are the erotic menu, which is on my website, and we'll have a link to that here.
Absolutely.
And the course that I mentioned, the online virtual curriculum for Awakening Your Erotic Muse. It's a community of high-powered, creative, open-minded, entrepreneurial women who are getting back in touch with their feminine radiance, their sensuality, and learning how to use that energy to have an even greater impact and more enjoyment and pleasure in their life. That is awakeningyoureroticmuse.com. And then my website, where there's also a form you can fill out if you are interested in one-on-one coaching, and where you can find the erotic menu, is jamieelizabeththompson.com, JamieElizabethThompson.com. And then I'm also very active in posting lots of content on social media. And my Instagram handle is at Holistic Sex Coach. And my Facebook is facebook.com/Miss Jamie Elizabeth, MISS, JamieElizabeth.com.
Beautiful. Well, guys, if this has not intrigued you enough, I highly encourage that you go check her out. How I found Jamie was on Instagram. I had been manifesting having this conversation, and here we are tonight, which is just incredible. Jamie, I want to thank you so much for being so in tune with your feminine energy, with your amazingness, and bringing that to us. I think that a lot of women are going to, just have kind of a whole new outlook on their sexual power and their health, and how that's really, a tool for them. So thank you for being you.
It's my pleasure.
Join me this Thursday as we take our power back, and we're going to lead right from this conversation into the next by creating your self-care routine. Until then, if you want to check out previous episodes of the Gutsy Podcast, or if you're interested in working one-on-one with me, visit thegutsypodcast.com. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at @thatlauraora. And of course, until I see you next time, stay gutsy.